Putin is committing to an all-out war to destroy Ukraine. Up until this point, Russia had control of Ukrainian territories in the southeast, which had population mostly of Russian ethnicity. This was their pretext for invading back in 2014, but right now they're targeting the entirety of the country. Airstrikes at military facilities have been reported all across Ukraine. Troops have been moving into Ukraine from both the east and the north. Even though Putin has announced this as a special military operation or whatever, in reality this is a declaration of war, unprovoked and unavoidable war at this point. Now the big question here that everyone is having, why is Putin doing all of this? I have three reasons for you, and the first one is fear of losing his power. Vladimir Putin is an authoritarian oligarch who has had a firm grip on power in Russia for more than 20 years. But his power is weakening, and this is a tyrant's biggest fear. He cannot and would not allow this to happen. This is why every real political opponent that he has had is thrown in jail or worse. The expansion of Western influence in Eastern Europe is seen by Putin as him losing his influence. And the more the West moves eastward, the more the dictator feels threatened. Now I want to make this perfectly clear. What he sees as an attempt to seize his power, many people in those regions see as an opportunity to have a better life, better future, a possibility for improvement of their community and a move away from Soviet tyranny. The war in Ukraine is a tool to show the entire region and the world that Russia is still the major power and it will be calling the shots around these regions. Putin believes that Ukraine is a Russian territory, or at the very least that Ukraine should be under Russian influence. This is why he gave that nationalistic speech. This is why he's rolling in the tanks right now. And this is why anyone in Russia who questions this war will probably go to prison. Now I realize I'm getting off track. So reason number 2, time is running out. This conflict started all the way back in 2008. And there's a good argument to be made that it began even before that. It was all about NATO expansion back then. Putin made it clear that Ukraine and Georgia are not going to join NATO. He went to war with Georgia and wrecked them in about 5 days back in 2008 when the initial declaration by NATO was made. Now, Georgia is a much smaller and much weaker country than Ukraine, but Putin is going to do the same here that he did in 2008. He simply does not care at this point, because as I said in the previous point, his power is under threat. When the conflict between Russia and Ukraine began, there were 3 possible ways of resolving it, at least from Putin's perspective. Number 1, Ukraine returns to be under Russian influence. Number 2, a deal is struck between Russia, the EU and Ukraine for mutual cooperation. And number 3, Putin goes in and wrecks Ukraine. Now it is painfully obvious we are in scenario number 3 right now. Scenario number 1 looks very unlikely. When an attempt for it to materialize occurred, it resulted in very bloody protests all the way back in 2014. The second one is something that should have happened by now. It's been about 14 years. If it hasn't happened by now, maybe Putin believes that it will never happen. As for what Putin wants from the West, here's a clip from the man himself.
Firstly, non-expansion of NATO to the east, non-deployment of offensive weapons next to the Russian borders, and finally, bringing back the military infrastructure back to the Confederation of 1997 when the founding act was signed between Russia and NATO.
Now, to be very brief here, I see the reasoning behind all 3 demands here, but realistically, only 2 of them can be achieved in some ways. To Putin, Ukraine is a key strategic interest. To the West, it's just another country that they want to spread Western values to. There is a big difference in resolve between the 2 sides. As long as the West is not committed to defend Ukraine with military force, Putin can do whatever he wants there. The sanctions that will be imposed on Russia are nothing to him. Yes, he will suffer financially. Yes, the Russian people will suffer financially. But let's not forget, he has a not so hidden trump card: nuclear weapons, thousands of them. And here's a quote from Putin that says that he is prepared to use them. And I quote, "To anyone who would consider interfering from the outside, if you do, you will face consequences greater than any of you have faced in history." This is a clear indication toward the West that if they go in, nuclear weapons will be used and then the whole world will suffer. Putin is a dictator with almost unlimited power in his country and is willing to do anything to keep it. And the West lacks a clear plan for dealing with him. The West is divided on many things right now, and Putin is willing to take advantage of it. I want to talk about Ukraine for a little bit and what they're doing, because they're in a very tough situation right now. I think we can all agree on this. To their credit, they're doing everything that they can in this situation. Evacuations have begun. The military is preparing to fight and defend the country, and fighting age Ukrainians are enrolling in the army. Ukrainian diplomats are trying to rally the help of the international community for all that it's worth. The president of Ukraine has made several powerful speeches that are worth listening, in my opinion. And while I don't want Ukraine to succumb to this foreign aggressor, I don't see how Russia could lose this war. While I would not question the courage and the determination of the people of Ukraine to defend their country till the very end, they simply do not have the military capabilities that Russia has. And Russia is not here to conquer them. They're invading with the primary goal of wrecking Ukraine. As for the West, I don't believe that they're taking this war seriously enough. In fact, I think they have not been taking this entire saga seriously from the very beginning. To them, this is just another country to spread Western values to. Yes, they will have their beautifully written condemnations of Russia's actions. Yes, they will probably impose sanctions toward Russia. But to be honest with you, I don't care about any of that. What I care about is ending this war with as few casualties as possible. I'm not suggesting that the West should send their military forces to defend Ukraine. That could easily escalate the situation to a world war. The West is right to be cautious when it comes to such possibilities. This is probably the only thing that they are taking seriously right now. After all, Putin has hinted that nuclear war is on the table if the West intervenes. Putin only cares about his own power, and he will stop at nothing to preserve it. So the West will only bark, but it will not bite. For the past 30 years, they have pushed around and humiliated Russia, and now all the Russian anger that has been boiling inside them will be poured onto the Ukrainian people. And for what crime, you may ask? For the crime of refusing to be under Russia's thumb. A change is needed to the Western approach to the situation, and is needed fast. I'm not talking about expelling Russia from the Western community either, because this will be a huge mistake and it could set the stage for a global conflict in the future. If Russia is completely isolated from the West, it will have to strengthen its partnership with China, and China, as you know, has their own territorial aspirations. Now, despite all the sanctions and all the condemnations, I don't believe that the West is as upset as the media will have you believe. All the pain and the suffering of the Ukrainian people is a great distraction for the West, and its leaders can now use this to shift the focus away from their own domestic failures. And their rivals can use this war as a political tool to gain more power, and they will offer witty slogans on social media instead of actually offering any solutions. This all plays into the Western division that I was talking about earlier. The only productive thing that the West can do, in my opinion, is to negotiate a ceasefire and to push for a diplomatic solution, even if a deal is not as good for them as they would have hoped. Now, there's much more to be said on the topic, I realize that. But I have the feeling that this is already long enough. So, as a conclusion, here's a quick summary. Russia aims to destroy Ukraine only to show its power in front of the international community. Putin will protect his power at all costs. Ukraine will fight for its survival till the very end, and the West will probably stand idly by due to the threat of a nuclear world war. I sincerely hope for this conflict to end peacefully, as naive as this sounds. Wars feed the rich while they bury the poor. Remember this, and thank you for watching.